Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Learn at Lunch webinar. Today's webinar will feature Ag economist Courtney Burr and Extension Farm Policy Specialist Amy Hagerman discussing the results of the recently conducted Economic Pulse Survey. If you have questions during the webinar, please ask them in the chat window. Click the chat button at the bottom of the screen to open the window and type your questions there. Drs. Burr and Hagerman will answer your questions at the end of the webinar. For additional farm management resources, visit the eFarm Management website. I will share this link in the chat window. I will turn it over to you now, Dr. Burr.
Hi, everyone. So some of you may have seen the sneak peek of this pulse survey that we had in another meeting, but this is the full analysis. All of this is available as a current report and is featured on the Extension COVID webpage as well. So if you'd like the actual report, you can go there, and we can also share that after the video. So we're going to go over the details of this. So the general survey information, this was really a team effort from everyone in AgEcon, all of our contacts, all the people across the state that participated. We basically just had a call out to see who was willing to take this survey. And it was from May 7th, 2020 to June 5th, 2020. We had 796 respondents, which was a great response rate. We had 71 of the 77 counties represented out of Oklahoma. So we did have 5 counties that had quite a bit of participation. Those counties were Payne, Grady, Oklahoma, Muskogee, and Tulsa. So we broke down the results of this survey a few different ways. One of these was through the Rurality Index. So the USDA has a Rurality Index that goes from 1 to 9. We split that into 3 groups. So 1 through 3 is low rurality, so think city. Then 4 through 6 is 2. And then the rest of those is group 3, which is high rural area, so think country. So we're going from rurality group 1, city, to rurality group 3, country in this segment.
So I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about some of the county level results. We actually split these a little bit further, and we discussed a lot of ways to do this. As Courtney mentioned, we only had a few counties that actually had enough responses that we could really drill down into a specific county. This was the way, using the Association of County Commissioners of Oklahoma Districts, that we could get a little more refined information for specific areas of the state. What this gains us over just looking at the Rurality Index is that we can break out Oklahoma City from Tulsa. We can break out the rural regions in the southeastern part of the state from the rural counties in the northwestern part of the state, because we certainly recognize there might be some differences in those areas in terms of perceptions or comfort in meetings. So this will let us just drill down a little bit further.
So first, talking about the demographics, we did ask people what their occupation was and the occupation of the adults in the household. Really what we thought might happen was that, some people based on their occupation may have different responses to these questions. What kind of happened is there's quite a bit of farmers, people involved in education, agribusiness, and then some sales. So it was very heavy towards those occupations. Obviously, we didn't list every occupation possible, so most people selected other. And so a lot of people found that other group. Looking at the demographics by rurality, you kind of see what you expect. So this rurality group 3, which remember is the more rural area, has a high percentage of farmer and ranchers. Rurality group 2 has a big group of people that are in education. So that was pretty much to be expected.
So then if you get down into the districts, and I probably should have mentioned this on the slide with the map, but there are 8 Association of County Commissioners of Oklahoma districts, 8 being in the far northwestern part of the state, and then it tracks down 7 in the central western part of the state and the southwestern part of the state. 6 is kind of that Caddo County and over, kind of getting up into the suburbs of Oklahoma City. 5 is the Oklahoma City and its suburb areas. 4 is that eastern side of Oklahoma City, kind of ducking down to the border there, almost to the border. 3 is the far southeastern part of the state. 2 is the far eastern central part of the state. 1 is the northeastern part of the state, including Tulsa. So kind of going through all that, that lets you know that if you're really looking at your most urban districts, then you're probably looking at District 1 and District 5. And if we look at across here, one of the things I thought was very interesting is that we saw a high number of responses in education in that District 1 and District 5 as compared to other areas. We did see, of course, a high number of farmers and ranchers, of course, in District 8, that includes the Panhandle, and then also District 6, which includes a lot more of our farmers and ranchers. I'm not sure why we didn't get as many farmers and ranchers down in District 7. It might be that we just didn't get as much distribution down in that area of the state. But I think we did see this high number of education of farmer and rancher. The other we really saw in those urban areas, it was just impossible with these categorizations to really capture the diversity of primary occupations for the people in the Tulsa and surrounding areas, in Oklahoma City and surrounding areas.
So one of the first questions that we asked respondents was how strong they felt their local economy was in January of 2020 and how strong they thought it was currently. And this was on a scale from 1 being strong and 5 being weak. So what you really see here in this full sample is a shift from I think my economy is strong to somewhat strong to I think my local economy is somewhat weak to weak in response to COVID. So a lot of people felt that COVID affected the economy. That's unsurprising considering how many businesses were shut down or impacted or had to change their marketing strategies in response to COVID and the new rules. When we look at it based on rurality index, you really start to see that story take place. So remember, rurality group 1 is the cities. And if you take the difference, so this is a graph of the difference. So the score you gave in January minus the score you gave currently at the time of the survey. So a -4 means my economy was very strong before and now it's very weak. So -4 is the worst case scenario where you went from very strong to very weak. So if you see this, none of these groups thought it was a -4. So no one thought it was as worse as it could possibly get. But the people in the cities thought it was pretty bad. So their difference was -2. So they really felt like their economy had gotten worse due to COVID-19. As you increase in rurality towards this group 3, a lot of the more rural communities felt like, yes, their economy took a hit, but it wasn't that bad. So the difference between their current economy health and the impact of COVID-19 wasn't as great as those more urban areas.
So we kind of get down into the district thing again. I think there are some additional pieces here that are interesting. And what I really like about looking at this difference that they reported between January and when they filled out the survey is that we know there were events that were already affecting certain parts of our state as of January that were affecting that local economy. For example, what was happening with oil and gas markets was already affecting the economy. What has happened with grain prices and kind of some of the farm financial things were affecting parts of our state already. So in looking at the differences, we create a bit of a clear playing field. It doesn't capture a lot of additional things in terms of the weakness of the economy. So that's sort of something to keep in mind. As Courtney had mentioned, in districts 1 and 5, which are more urban areas, we do really see this dip closer to 2. One of the things I thought was interesting is that District 1 in Tulsa, where COVID really started early on and had some of the early closures, they actually didn't feel like there was as much of a decrease as in District 5, Oklahoma City, although we did see a lot of spread in Oklahoma City. And as a result, we saw a lot of businesses close in Oklahoma City. One thing I do find really interesting when you think about sort of the suburbs around those areas and the towns where people maybe commute into the city, where businesses were affected by closures. Look at District 6, you do see every bit as much of a decline in confidence in their belief in the strength of their local economy as compared to District 5. But if you look at District 2, which is right next to Tulsa and includes some of those areas around Tulsa, some of that urban sprawl around Tulsa, you didn't see that kind of decline as compared to the area just right around Oklahoma City. I also thought it was interesting that our more rural areas actually were different. Whenever you look at, for example, District 8, which is up in the northwestern part of the state, as compared to District 3, down in the southwestern part of the state, you do see some impacts there. So I guess the bottom line here is that everyone all over the state, they really felt like there was some weakness in the economy as to compared to what we had before. But how weak really differed by the part of the state the respondents were in. And I think that may speak to then how much they feel might be required for recovery in the future. We didn't really ask that question necessarily, but I think it's a prelude to what we'll see in the length of time for recovery questions in a few slides.
Another thing that we highlight in the actual paper is that some of these districts do have sort of outdoor activities that are available for people. And so the districts that have lakes and campsites and things like that, their economic impact was less because people shifted from going to the movies or going to indoor activities to these outdoor parks and other types of recreation. So that sort of tourism, outdoor tourism, did help some of these counties. And so we highlight that in the paper, but I wanted to make sure that that was, kind of said in this forum as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we also asked people when they felt that the worst effects of this current crisis would abate. We do understand that things are changing quickly. No one can predict the future. And so it's difficult to ask people about, at what level would you feel safe going in terms of the number of cases or hospitalization. So we just took a general approach of time, just to kind of get a feel for how long people expected to be in this sort of new normal. Looking at this, at the big sample, most people, you kind of have two little groupings here. One that thought it would be between 1 to 6 months, and a group of people who thought it would be 10 or more months. So most people were not expecting the new normal, they were expecting the new normal to be around for a little bit. They weren't expecting to return to typical business, typical health, all of that sort of thing quickly. When you look at the rurality, it tells a slightly different story. So the more rural area of 3 seems to be a little bit more optimistic in terms of when we will return to normal, with those cities that were honestly had more of an impact from COVID being a little bit more reluctant to say, we're going to be back to normal in 4 to 6 months or 1 to 3 months.
So this one gets really busy because, of course, you've got each of these different options and you've got all the different districts in each one of them. So just looking at some of the general patterns, it reflects a lot of what Courtney just said, that you kind of have these 2 bumps in there, the people who are a little more optimistic, who felt, and remember, we finished this as of early June, so we hadn't seen the big secondary spike at the time we finished this. Who really felt like the worst was over, we were reopening, things were going to get back to normal. And then you see sort of the others who are a little more pessimistic, who are like, nope, this isn't over yet. We're going to be in this for a while. It's going to take a while to recover from this. So you did see these 2 different areas. What's interesting, though, I think, is that in terms of patterns, among the different districts, you do see spikes in different places for different districts. For example, District 3, which is the far southeastern part of the state, you see that spike there at 4 to 6 months. Where you in terms of the near term. I mean, that's not taking into, I don't think you can see my cursor, but that's not really taking into account this spike out in the 13 plus months. But just looking at that first peak, you really see a higher peak in District 3 than you do in the others in the 4 to 6 month range. District 1, that first peak, really the peak across the whole series, was in that 4 to 6 months. And remember, that's the Tulsa area. Whereas District 5, which was the Oklahoma City area, there was a lot more pessimism so in that area, in that district, out in the 13 plus months. So it's just, there's a lot of differences by area. I won't go into, we could spend a lot of time parsing this out by district for this particular graph alone. I would really encourage you to go to that document for your particular area of the state and just look at those results. But I think for all of us, this really speaks to the fact that there are people who are expecting a long road to recovery from this crisis.
Yes, I completely echo that. And I know a lot of us who are doing meetings and conducting that sort of thing, we feel the urgency to get back to normal and provide people with a normal business style life. And this is kind of showing that they aren't expecting that. So hopefully some of you educators feel a little bit better knowing that, you know, people aren't expecting it to be back to normal. So it's kind of okay. So looking at, this is a little bit different than in the paper. This is basically looking at who is comfortable going to or sending someone to, a family member, a business associate, to a meeting or training of less than 10 people, assuming that social distancing protocols are in place. In the paper, we go into more detail and ask, what if it's more than 10? But for this specific little lunch and learn, we're going to talk about less than 10 people, which is currently the CDC recommendation. So 56% of people in the full survey felt like they were comfortable with a meeting of less than 10 people with social distancing in place. Having said that, a lot of people look at this number and say, well, 56, that's the majority, like we should maybe have in person. But if you make that decision, you're leaving out 44% of the people who are not comfortable. So this really tells me that in the near future, either having a hybrid version of in-person with options for online, or continuing with these sort of online meetings is really the best way to be inclusive and make sure that everyone feels comfortable participating. When you look at it by rurality, people in urban areas are less comfortable. So 55% of people in that rural group 1, which is basically the cities, are comfortable versus 66% of people living in the rural areas. And some of this may just be the reflection of the rural areas not having as dense of a population and not having as many cases of COVID. But when you start having meetings and putting those people together, we could accidentally change that trend. So there's still a lot of people, even in rural areas, 66% are comfortable, but that means a lot of people are uncomfortable with meetings of less than 10 people.
And this just drives that point home as well, in that we really see that trend across all of the districts in the state. Whether you're looking at our most urban districts in districts 1 and 5, or you're looking at our most rural districts in 3, 7, and 8, you still see this impact of that there are about half to a little more than half maybe of people who are comfortable having in-person meetings of less than 10 people. The other thing I thought was really interesting, which is in the paper, but we don't really go into it in detail here due to time, is that if you look at this question by occupation, there are some very interesting results there as well, in that, you know, for example, farmers and ranchers were a little more comfortable with group meetings, whereas educators were a little more they were a little less comfortable with the group meetings as compared to the average across all respondents. You know, are those of us in Extension who answered this question were less comfortable with group meetings? And maybe some of that's, you know, the people who are responsible for putting on meetings versus people who are responsible for their own health and attending meetings. Maybe we're seeing a difference there of people who are taking on responsibility and making decisions that impact other people's health versus just their own personal health. So I think there's some interesting results there as well. But if we look across all of the districts, we do see some pretty strong consistency in how people felt about this particular question.
All right, well, that wraps it up for today. We're more than happy to take questions. If you think about some questions later, or maybe look at the document and think of some more questions, feel free to email myself or Amy. We would really appreciate it if you would take the survey regarding this presentation. That just helps us get some feedback and make sure that we're presenting information that all of you are interested in. If there's any questions, let us know.
Thank you, Dr. Hagerman and Dr. Burr, for sharing your results with us. While everyone is typing in their questions and stuff, we have a survey, another survey about this webinar, and that gives us good feedback about how we're doing in this series of webinars. And so we would greatly appreciate you filling that out. And I will share the link to it in the chat box as well.
I guess if nobody has questions, then I'll ask a question to everybody. Do any of these results surprise you? Or do they pretty much line up with what you thought based on what you've heard people say in your communities? I mean, you can give me like a thumbs up, it all made sense, or a thumbs down, surprised me. So no surprise. That's, you know, when you do a survey, that's actually what you want to hear, is that there's no surprises from the people who are in that area, because you do really feel like maybe you got something representative, if close to representative. I know that's a technical term, Courtney. I'm not using it in the technical sense of representative sampling, but you feel like you got something that, you know, kind of makes sense when you put it really to the boots on the ground test in the local community. So thank you for that.
I'm going to share the link to the full paper in here as well, in case anyone can't find it quickly. There's also a lot of other resources in that same section. So if you Google OSU Extension, on our Extension page at the top are a bunch of COVID report links. So if you click that, it goes to COVID reports, and there's basically an ag econ section. There's a section for farm finances. There's a section for family life. So that's a really great resource for everyone, and that paper is available there. And I also put it in the link.
Thank you for sharing the paper and everything in the chat box. So yeah, that link is available. If anyone wants it, they can just go to the chat box and find that link. Feel free to type questions if you have any questions. I haven't seen any questions so far, but now is the time if you do have any questions. And Doctors Burr and Hagerman will gladly answer them for you.
There is one more report that was posted today, actually, that goes into a little more detail in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on their ability, people's ability to find meat, milk, that sort of thing, paper products, their daily activities, daily life. So that will be available today. And we'll probably do another sort of webinar about that information as well. So if you're interested in that, give me an email and I will forward that to you.
And your email is courtney.burr@okstate.edu, correct?
Yes.
I still don't see any questions. See, Janda was interested in your in that paper or that came out today, and I don't see any other questions. So I think we will wrap it up. So thank you everyone for attending today. Thank you, Amy and Courtney, for presenting your results. We appreciate you presenting in this webinar series. So we have not scheduled our August webinar yet, but we are working on that now. So I will inform everyone through email and social media when that is available. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.